G'day, welcome to this episode of the ADF Architecture TV channel. My name's Chris Muir, I'm an ADF product manager working for Oracle Corporation. In today's episode we're going to look at something which is possibly not the most exciting part of development, but that is version control. Now version control, as a best practice, you already probably have your own version control systems and procedures at your organization. It's pretty well established now. Making copies of your files and placing them on a file server somewhere is not really considered version control. Now in the version control world, we know that in the Java space, Subversion is pretty much the de facto version control system. Now without a doubt, JIT or Git, now I'm never sure which way to pronounce it, depending on which part of the world you come from, but JIT or Git is becoming much more acceptable as a version control system out there for Oracle customers and basically Java customers as a whole. But the reality is still most organizations have Subversion at their organization. Now with that in mind, with that one large customer base using Subversion, I really want to address the use of Subversion from an ADF perspective. Because with Subversion, you would know that it has a very flexible repository system. The repository system is based around a file system of folders and files, and just like a normal file system on an operating system, you can basically do whatever you want in terms of how you lay out the code that you're checking into Subversion. But there are a bunch of pre-established conventions with Subversion. You'd be familiar with the trunk, tags, and branches structures. And in addition, what I want to talk to you about is, from an ADF perspective, how do you wedge ADF applications into those structures? Particularly when we talked about early episodes, the different architectural patterns that we have for ADF applications, where we have multiple workspaces. Is there some considerations about how we store those multiple workspaces in our Subversion repositories? So that's what I want to talk about today. It's all about Subversion repository layout. So based on the assumption you know the general way to lay out a Subversion repository in terms of trunks, tags, and branches, let's discuss the different types of ADF architectural patterns or the different sets of ADF source code that you may actually wedge into a Subversion repository. Now you remember from our ADF architectural patterns episodes, many episodes ago, there's kind of really two broad architectures. There's the lump everything in one workspace architecture, or the let's break everything up into multiple parts workspace architecture. Now both of those, well, you can wedge those into a Subversion repository, and I'd like to talk about the Uber or the single or the monolithic workspace example first in terms of the Subversion repository, but then in addition, in terms of multiple workspaces, which we call the sum of the parts, I want to talk about two different schemes for effectively wedging the different workspaces into a Subversion repository. And the reason I want to talk about the two different schemes is there in fact is pros and cons to both approaches, and they actually suit different development houses. Enterprise shops that are maintaining dev test prod systems may actually want to use one way of laying out their Subversion repositories from, let's say, ISVs or independent software vendors who are doing shrink wrap software releases. They may actually want to lay their Subversion repository out another way. So let's start out with the very simple one workspace example, and then we'll look through two separate examples on taking multiple workspaces and putting them into Subversion, the overall repository, and the advantages and disadvantages this will give you. So let's look at JDeveloper and the actual Subversion versioning window in JDeveloper connecting to a repository, Subversion repository, just dealing with one workspace. Now, as you'll notice here, I've set up a standard connection connecting to a predetermined Subversion repository. And inside that repository, we can see our theoretical workspace here, the JDeveloper workspace called the Firewire app. Within the Firewire app, you can now see the standard repository layout that you would have for Subversion. You see trunks, tags, and branches. In context of the trunk, you can now see the actual associated source code for the Firewire app. So the model, the view controller directories, the Firewire app JWS file, and so on and so forth. Now, if we're to check out from the trunk in that Subversion repository, it's worth noting that what actually gets checked out on the file system is not the parent directory Firewire app and then a trunk directory, and then the source code, JDeveloper is smart enough in this case just to check out the source code and put it under the parent directory of the application name. In this example, in addition, we can also see some branches. Now, the branch versioning scheme here, 1.1, 1.2, and the associated dates is just a scheme that I've seen at other sites. It's up to you to create your own branch numbering scheme. You can also see the tags equivalent here, and obviously this particular customer is using a CI engine, continuous integration server, to create a number of nightly builds, and you can see the build 001, build 002 numbering scheme here. And within the branches and the tags directory, you can see the associated workspace code. So in summary, this shows you how we could lay out a single workspace in a Subversion repository. So now let's have a look at a Subversion repository laid out for multiple workspaces. Again, here you can see we have a predetermined connection to the Subversion repository. And just like we've seen previously, we have branches, tags, and trunk, pretty much the standard Subversion repository layout structure. Now, from a previous episode of the ADF Architecture TV channel, we talked about when you have multiple workspaces that it's good practice to lay them out in separate subdirectories indicating their function. So you might put a common workspace under a common subdirectory, a number of bounded task flow workspaces under a flows directory, and the specific composite or master application workspaces under an applications directory. You'll notice under the applications directory, we can now see specific applications like previous, Firewire app, and HR app. And in context of those, you can now see the final source code, in this case for the Firewire app, the model, the view controller projects, the Firewire app.jws file, and so on and so forth. Further to this, if we investigate some of the other subdirectories under the trunk directory, the flows directory, a workspace called mflows, we can see the remaining directories for that source code there. Now, if we return to the trunk directory and we actually check out from the trunk directory, we can see that not only have we just checked out one workspace, but in fact we've checked out all the directory structures, so applications, commons, flows, and the specific applications and the source code. So the one little checkout operation here has brought out a substantial amount of code, multiple workspaces in one checkout operation. Now if we return the branches and the tags directories, as we can see here, we're replicating the same directory structures within each branch and with each tag. So a checkout at these levels would also return all the subdirectories, the applications, the commons, the flows, the actual application directories, the workspace directories that is, and the specific code. One checkout here can bring all the code out for all your application workspaces. So the advantages of this particular Subversion repository layout is that when we check out code, we get all the code. So not just one workspace, but any codependent workspaces, and we know we've got the right version from them. Because rather than having to go to check out a workspace from this trunk or unique tag and branch, and a dependent workspace from this unique tag or branch or trunk, we know it's all under a trunk or a tag or a branch. We get it all together. And in addition, that means we don't even need to version or track the versions of our dependencies between our workspaces. This is a pretty good thing. Now, this type of layout, this repository layout, would be very beneficial to organizations such as software release organizations, ISVs, independent software vendors, who basically, now from our perspective, might have multiple ADF workspaces, but from a customer's perspective, they don't care about all those workspaces. They just get one large release of code. You know, new alpha application 1, new alpha application 2, new alpha application 3. And the fact that when you check out from the trunk, or a tag or a branch, you get all the code that goes with alpha 1 or alpha 2 or alpha 3 very much suits the release mechanisms of those ISVs. Now the flip side of this is the disadvantages of the Subversion repository layout we're proposing here is, well, when you check out from a trunk or a tag or a branch, you get all the code. Unless the developer specifically buries their way through somewhere in the directory structures of, say, the JDeveloper workspace in the trunk, they're not typically going to do that. So they tend to check out at the trunk level or tags or branches, and they just get it all. Eeks. So that could be lots and lots of code. Further to that, well, if you think about, we check out all that code and we just need to make one little change to one workspace, geez, we've got all this other code to deal with as well, and it can seem a little bit of an overkill. But you can see this particular layout mechanism for our repository, our Subversion repository, does suit a style of software development. So here we've got a combination of our ADF architectures coming together with a Subversion repository and also a release mechanism that may suit your particular software development house. Okay, so now let's have a look at a different way to lay out a multiple ADF workspace Subversion repository. So once again here we can see a pretty much a standard connection to a Subversion repository. But it's different from last time. Rather than having trunk, branches and tags at the top level, we've in fact got our application commons and flows directories, then the application workspaces themselves, in this case Firewire app and HR app, and then the significant change is now you can see trunk, tags and branches under the specific workspace. So previously where these were at the top level of the Subversion repository, now we've got them at each workspace level. As you can see here in the trunk directory, there is all the source code associated with the Firewire app. In addition, at the branch level, you can see the associated source code for that branch for the Firewire app, and pretty much the same thing at the tags directory. So the major change from this particular repository layout from the previous one is because we typically check out at the trunk or the branch or the tag level. If we're to do that here, we're not going to get all the workspaces. We're only going to get the specific workspace we've located in the repository layout hierarchy. So what's the advantages of this Subversion repository layout scheme? Well, previously we had all the workspaces under a trunk or a single branch or tag, and you had to check them all out together or not, and they're all versioned together under a specific branch or tag. Well, in this scheme, no, they're actually versioned under separate branches or tags. So you may have, for example, two master ADF workspaces, and one might be under its own branch, tag or trunk structure, another one under its own branch, tag and trunk structure, and for each master workspace you can have specific branches, branch 1.1, branch 1.2 for this master workspace, and branch 6.7, branch 6.8 for this master workspace. They're very much independent in terms of how they're versioned now. So that's a really good thing. That independent versioning allows you, as example, to release the different master workspaces at different times. Unlike the previous Subversion repository layout scheme where you just release them all together. However, the disadvantages of this particular layout scheme is, now those two workspaces, they may be reliant on another workspace, let's say a banner taskload workspace. Now, this master application, is it reliant on branch 1.1 of that banner taskload workspace or branch 1.2? You're going to need tools like Apache Ivy to assist you in keeping track of that. Flip side is, oh, that guy over there. Now, is he reliant on the same branch of that BTF workspace or a different branch? Oh, now we've got to keep track of two things. You see the complications that are coming in here? And you multiply that out by all your workspaces that are being versioned in separate branches and tags in their own trunks, you can see the complications you're going to get into. In addition, when you need to build these applications, you've got to make sure you pick out the specific branches or tags that you need for your master workspace. Okay, and all the dependent workspaces and all the dependent workspaces. This is going to become difficult. But with that difficulty, with that complexity there, you get a flexible release structure because you don't have to release all your master workspaces in one Uber release. Much more flexible. You notice how we get this in computing? When you get one advantage somewhere, you get a disadvantage or a trade-off somewhere else. In this case, got a lot of flexibility in our release cycles, but also we've got a very messy release cycle in that we have to pick out all the individual bits of what's going to make a current master application that we're rolling out today. So it is really curious here, isn't it, that we see that when dealing with Subversion, we need to first of all consider its trunk tags branch structure. But in addition, from our ADF perspective, depending on the number of workspaces, we've got to consider how we'll put all those workspaces into the Subversion structures and version them either together or independently. But further to that, we even see from the release cycle or the checkout mechanism Subversion, we have an impact on how we deliver solutions. Is it one large release followed by another large release followed by another large release of all the workspaces? Or are we releasing all our workspaces and our master applications independently? Now you kind of go, oh, I never thought of like that. Geez, I think we need to go and think about what sort of software development house are we? Are we an enterprise that does a dev, test, prod rollout of everything together? Or are we an enterprise house that does dev, test, prods of multiple application systems independently? Or are we an independent software vendor that releases all our software to our customers in a big chunk? So before you actually sit down and start effectively doing your ADF development, you also need to have a think about what sort of software development house you are. And then when you start your ADF development, well, you will want to get for your developers a version control system into place, our Subversion repositories in this case. So rather than just basically whacking a trunk, a branch and tag structure together, maybe you should also have a think about, okay, with this sort of software house, we're going to have that many sort of workspaces. So that means we should create our Subversion repository layout this way. So hopefully this episode's been useful to you. Obviously we've presented this in the development phase of the ADF Architecture TV channel, and it's a little bit too far down the line, but it is something that you could actually be getting your administrative staff, your version control staff to think about right up early when you start your ADF development. So hopefully this has been useful to you today. So as usual, thanks for joining us on the ADF Architecture TV channel today. We hope you've enjoyed the content, and once again we hope to see you on another episode very soon.